Ken Blanchard is quoted as saying, "Servant leadership is all about making the goals clear and then rolling your sleeves up and doing whatever it takes to help people win." Let's talk about servant leadership on today's episode of the Playing with a Purpose podcast. All right, welcome to the Playing with a Purpose podcast, where we explore topics related to the moral development of collegiate athletes and young people as it relates to character, responsibility, and purpose. I'm your host, Matt Barker, and today I'm excited to have the Pulpit Minister at the Henderson Church of Christ, Mr. Robert Hatfield, with me on today's episode. Robert, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks for having me, Matt. I'm glad to be here.
Really excited to have you on for this episode. Robert is as I mentioned, the Pulpit Minister at the Henderson Church of Christ, where I attend. So I was trying to think of people that could talk on this topic, and I thought you'd be a great one to address this topic.
I hope so.
You know, one of the things I think about since you've been at Henderson since we were talking 2021, 2022, we've done a lot more service-minded projects. You know, we have the Community Servants Day at church, where we have or Community Car Care Day, I guess I should call it. Yeah. And we have a lot of different outreach opportunities. Not that we haven't done them before, but it seems to be more of a focus now. Definitely a servant leadership aspect tied to that as well. So I wanted to have you on just to talk a little bit about what servant leadership is and how that looks in churches, maybe organizations, and just broader context of that. Tell us a little bit about yourself for those that might not know who you are.
Yeah. So, Robert, my wife, Emily, we were married in 2011. We graduated from Freed-Hardeman University in 2010. We have two great kiddos and spent all of my adult life, even like teenage life, in ministry and preaching. I preached my first sermon, a real sermon, when I was 15, and then that was in 2002, so this is 2025. That was 23 years ago. What in the world?
It's crazy.
And have served churches in Middle Tennessee, and then Charleston, South Carolina, and the greater Charlotte, North Carolina area, and then now here in Henderson, like you said, since 2022. So it's awesome to be here. You know, when we came to Henderson, the elders said, we want you to focus on community outreach, local evangelism. And so that's where a lot of that stuff has come in. And it's challenged me too. I said, Henderson is challenging my own leadership in some good ways. So, today, the thoughts I'll share will be admittedly somewhat aspirational. You know, it's things that we want to be, and we're kind of best foot forwarding things today. So it's good.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about the Light Network, which started in 2013. This was when you were, were you at North Charleston?
No, we were in Pulaski, Tennessee still.
So 2013 started the Light Network, which is a podcast dedicated to a lot of spiritual topics and different things. Tell us a little bit about that. And I always joke because usually if I have a question about podcast stuff, you're the one I call. So I feel pretty comfortable here today because if I have a problem, you can just help me right where you're here.
We have done 3,000 podcast episodes since 2013. Which is kind of crazy. You know, we used to get the question, what's a podcast? Nobody really knew what a podcast was. We don't get that question anymore, man. Right. Everybody knows what a podcast is.
Everybody's doing one.
Yeah, it was just a fun thing. I thought I had done some radio, through ministry. I did some radio shows back in the day, and I really enjoyed it. And so we got into the podcast thing. Yeah, the Light Network exists to encourage, enlighten, and empower people toward daily Christian living. And that's why we have a sort of a family of podcasts that address a wide variety of niches relative to Christian living. Yeah. We've got, shows for preachers and ministers, shows for families, shows for teens, shows about finance, shows about mental health. Boy, I'm leaving some out. Shows just for women called Wifey Wednesdays, and then shows for men called Authentically Adam. It's all there at thelightnetwork.tv, but what a fun journey it's been. And it has grown up with me over the years too. When we started, we had only been married for 2 years. We didn't have kids. And the Light Network has just sort of helped me in my ministry in ways that I can't even begin to describe. So, yeah, I'm grateful for that. And it's helped me in, we're talking about leadership today. It's helped me in leadership as well, because I've kind of had to step into some arenas that I don't think I probably would have addressed just in normal kind of preacher world. So it's been good.
Yeah, I enjoy listening to a lot of the podcasts on there, the lightnetwork.tv, if you'd like to check that out. It's definitely good. You can always listen to 4 preachers in a podcast, one of my favorites. We talk a little bit about that. I like you and your co-hosts on that one. That's always fun to listen to, if not just for the banter.
That's right. Well, we don't take ourselves too seriously.
That's right. It's good. Get into some good topics, but also have a little bit of fun along the way as well. Also want wanted to mention October 3rd through 5th is the Light Network Conference at Henderson Church of Christ. And if you want a little more information about servant leadership, even after today's conversation, Dan Winkler will be doing a session on servant leadership at the Light Network Conference. And that started last year, was the first year for that?
Yeah, we did it 2 years ago, 2023. And then we took a year off. I said, I'm going to have to forget how hard this was. And now we're doing it one more time. And it's just a good opportunity for, our listeners, kind of the Light Network family, people who want to be in our family, to all come together. Yeah. And we get to hear from our hosts, and they speak. Like you said, Dan's going to address some topics. We've got a majority of our hosts who are coming in to do some speaking, and it's all free. So thelightnetwork.tv/conference is where you can find out more info about
My mom
that.
will be there because Hiram Kemp is going to be there.
Oh, sweet.
She loves Hiram Kemp. So she heard him speak in Bowling Green one time, and she said, I'm going. She goes to Polishing the Pulpit to hear him. So
I love it.
She will be there October 3rd through 5th, and hopefully some of you all can as well.
Yeah.
So getting into the topic of servant leadership, this is, for Robert, you might not know this, but the NAIA, where the athletes at Freed-Hardeman competed, this association, they have 5 core values, and one of those core values is servant leadership. But a lot of times athletes and just college students in general don't know exactly what servant leadership even is. They hear the word. From an athletic standpoint, they don't always know what that means. From just a general standpoint, they don't always even know what servant leadership is. So how would you define, from the church context, what servant leadership is, maybe in your own words?
Yeah, I think it's just leading by example. It's portraying in yourself what you hope to see in the people who are watching you. It means that my heart is focused on serving others rather than just being served. It's about putting the needs of others first. It's about helping others grow and succeed, about being willing to roll up your sleeves and doing the work alongside them. So, if you're a team captain, if you're a leader in on your team, you understand that you're going to have to be willing to put in the work as well if you're going to inspire that in others. That applies in any context. Where church, of course, that's kind of the context where I find myself all the time.
Yeah.
But in business as well, really anywhere, if you want to inspire others, and if you want a team, a group of people, an organization, a culture that is bought in, that's willing to sacrifice, that's willing to not only invest in an individual, but in the team as a whole, servant leadership is where you have to begin.
Yeah. And this term kind of came to be more popularized, I guess, in the 1970s. Robert Greenleaf, I studied about him a lot in the studies I had with leadership. So Robert Greenleaf was kind of one of the ones that talked about this term quite a bit more in the 1970s. But this has been something that's emulated throughout the Bible, throughout Scripture, throughout people's lives. They see people that demonstrate these characteristics. Anyone that comes to your mind, I know obviously Jesus is the always the perfect answer. Yeah. Anyone that comes to your mind when you think about the qualities of a servant leader, and maybe what qualities did they exhibit?
Well, there are so many people that I could mention, and their names are not names that anyone listening to this necessarily would know unless you know me personally. People I grew up with, and that's the thing about servant leadership. It's something that you sort of look back and realize that it was happening. Okay, that's what they were doing. Yeah. Just people who were quietly serving behind the scenes. Maybe they were spending time with people that were a little disenfranchised or kind of on the fringes. Yeah. Maybe they were encouraging people who were discouraged. In church world, I think about people who are helping the homeless or investing in others without seeking any notoriety at all. In fact, unless you really know them well, you wouldn't even know that any of that existed. Yeah. I think there are some professors here at Freed-Hardeman who do that kind of thing, especially with international students. Yeah. They're really helpful to international students. And I think, wow, that's awesome, because their families are thousands of miles away. Yeah. And it's such a blessing that they're willing to do that. It's like you said, though, the ultimate servant leader is Jesus. I'm not going to get preachy on the podcast today, but I am going to talk about some stuff, because Mark 10:45, Jesus said, even the Son of Man, which gives us this implication that it didn't have to be this way. Yeah. So he's trying to really push this point. Even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. So if I'm looking at qualities, what I appreciate in the people that I haven't named, because you wouldn't know their names, and which is really, they were reflecting Jesus. He was humble. He was compassionate. He was patient. He was sacrificial. He had all the authority, and yet he washed his disciples' feet, And that shows that true leadership is ultimately about service. And that's a hard thing to balance in a competitive environment. I want to be at the top of my game. I want to be in the business world, at the top of this corporate ladder.
Yeah.
And that's okay to want that stuff. But Jesus sort of turns that on its ear a little bit and challenges us to not only look out for ourselves, but for the interest of other people around us.
Yeah. Mentions that multiple times throughout Scripture as well.
Right.
Ephesians, comes to mind with that. But thinking about the mindset, I think one of the challenges with servant leadership, it's so different than what the world's telling us, especially in maybe the culture that we live in today. It is all about ourselves. It is about how can we do what we need to do to make sure that we're succeeding. And we're not always looking about other people. So it takes a different mindset, I think, is what we emulate Christ, but that means we need to be servant leaders, and it takes a different way of looking at things, I think. And I saw something I looked up, and I could not find who quoted this, the author of it, but it says it requires a shift from thinking about position and power to thinking about people and purpose.
Oh, wow.
I was like, man, alliteration there. I love some alliteration, but,
That's good,
position and power, shifting that to think about people and purpose. Like, what are we here for? We're to serve other people. Yeah. It's not always about what position or power we can hold. So how can someone maybe develop the mindset of a servant leader? What are some things they can do maybe to do that?
I have learned over the years that most of leadership is what you do when nobody's looking. We think about what happens on the court or on the field versus off. For every quarter that is spent playing a game, that represents hours of unseen effort. That's true for an athlete. That's true for the coach. That's true for any of the staff. And it's certainly true for anybody who's a leader. What kind of person are you really? When nobody's looking, what motivates you? Are you seeking applause, or are you seeking some kind of publicity? Or are you moved for others out of compassion for them and for their needs, out of a genuine concern for their well-being? See, that's what Jesus teaches us to do. I like how you said that. It's about living with a purpose and focusing on the people. And that's Christ's likeness. That's why Jesus is such a beautiful person. So all this begins with humility. If we're talking about servant leadership, it's recognizing that leadership really isn't about power and prestige. It's about helping other people. And practically, I think this means looking for small ways to serve people on a regular basis. Yeah. It's going to mean listening more than speaking. It means intentionality. It means putting other people's needs before your own. And it means that you're going to develop your own skills and talents and personal well-being and personal health so that you're able to get in front and lead others in the path that you've found that you believe to be the right path. And that's the thing about leadership. A lot of us want to be leaders, but we don't want to put the work in that's required to be the leader.
Right.
Servant leadership says, I know the way, and I'm willing to show it to you, but I'm not going to just stand up on this mountain and bark the orders down at you. I'm going to come down and come alongside you and help you get to a place that I've already been. I know how to take you there. So it means that you're willing to lead them alongside of you. And it also acknowledges that any leader expects to lead others beyond themselves. A teacher can reasonably expect that eventually his or her students will surpass him or her, right? Some of that is just because you're already advanced in where you are, and there comes a day when technology will go beyond what you're able to keep up with,
right.
Or something like that. So, we expect that that's going to be the case. Good athletes will often exceed their coaches. Not always, but often they will. And so we have to develop this mindset. And I love the way you asked the question, developing a mindset of a servant leader. It's going to require, first of all, that I take care of myself. But I don't do that from a selfish place. I do it because having found purpose, health, well-being in every sense of the term, myself, and we would say from a Christian perspective, that ultimately that's rooted in Jesus, okay? Having found that myself, now I've tapped into a resource where I can give that to somebody else. And I realize that by giving to another, I'm not taking from myself. That servant leadership says there's more where that came from because I'm not pulling out of my own storehouses. Even if I'm having to make some kind of financial sacrifice to serve another person. Yeah. The cattle on 1,000 hills belongs to God. And what I have, I've been given for now so that I can pass that on to another person in his service. Yeah. So self-reflection, learning to love, prayer, a willingness to accept feedback, Boy, that's hard, but that's humility, And over time, when you do these things, your heart is naturally shifting toward service. And I think if we're really honest, we realize that this is the best path, but it's not the easiest path.
Right. Yeah, you mentioned getting feedback from others. That is not easy. When you put yourself out there and you do things, you're going to get feedback, whether good or bad. And sometimes the bad sticks with you more than the good feedback that you get. So I think that's maybe one of the challenges of being a servant leader. So thinking about maybe from a church standpoint, maybe even organizationally as well, what role does servant leadership play in building strong churches? Maybe how does that look like practically in churches? Like, what does servant leadership look like? Maybe some examples that you see maybe in churches.
If you want trust and respect, then you're going to roll your sleeves up and get busy alongside the people who are willing to get busy. More and more, I've come to realize that it's often the people, not exclusively, but it's often the people who have the greatest heart of service, who are the most spiritually mature. And when leaders serve, it inspires the whole team to support each other, to lead to greater unity, to a shared purpose. Biblically, I look at Ephesians chapter 4. It uses the church and the body analogy, and it talks about how Jesus is the head. And it says in Ephesians 4, 14, 15, 16, when every part of the body does its share, then it contributes toward the growth of the body. Well, that's true in any context. I mean, it's certainly true of the church, which is really what it's talking about.
Right.
But, it'll work with a team of any kind. Servant leadership breaks down barriers. It removes fear of failure. It's like, we're going to try this, and if it's not perfect, we'll iterate.
Yeah.
It fosters this environment where people feel valued. So whether you're in a church setting or you're on a sports team or you're a part of a business, this is the kind of culture that strengthens relationships and improves overall effectiveness. And to me, I'm one of these people, I like to sort of trace things back and sort of see how this works. I want to watch the arc, happen.
Yeah.
And so I think from a values approach or a philosophical approach, and I'm not a philosopher, but anyway, it breaks down kind of like this. First, it starts with me. I have to be my own whole individual. I'm not needy. I'm not a taker. I can receive, but I'm a giver. I want to give. So I'm intrinsically valued and loved. I know that. I have talents. I have unique things that I can contribute toward my team, toward my congregation, toward my business. I can do that. And when I look around and I see the other people who are a part of this organization, everybody around me is likewise loved and intrinsically valued. Yeah. And we believe that because we believe the Bible, which says that God creates every human being in his image. Every human being. It doesn't matter. Take away all the qualifiers. Every human being is made in the image of God and therefore has intrinsic values and therefore has God-given, whether they acknowledge that or not, talents and unique things that they can contribute, even if that's just a unique perspective of life that they can contribute from. So I have that, and I look around and I see everybody else has that as well. And then as the leader, what I want to do is to steward what I have to make it the best that it can be, not to the detriment of another person or to another teammate. Instead, I want my contributions to help others and to add value to our whole team, to our team as a unit.
Yeah.
Now, Jesus says, and the biblical principle is, to whom much is given, much is required. And if you're faithful in a little, God will bless you so that you can be faithful in a little more. And eventually you'll be faithful in much. You think about the parable of the talents in Matthew 13. I mean, who gave the 5-talent man 5 talents and the 3-talent man the 3 talents and the 1-talent man the 1 talent? I mean, these are things that in the story, the master, and so we're talking about God, we're talking about Jesus. He blesses us and he expects us to respond in a way that corresponds with what we've been given. So that's stewardship, that's talent, that's value, and that's this notion that I'm going to use what I've been given to help out the culture as a whole. And so that takes me back to Ephesians 4 and back more to your question. Yeah. What role does this play in a strong organizational culture? I would argue you're going to have a hard time building a healthy culture without servant leadership of some kind. And if you're at the top and you're not doing it, and you have a healthy culture, I guarantee you somebody down the chain is doing it.
Yeah.
Because honestly, that's about the only way that you're going to be able to foster the kind of culture, the kind of think about some of the stories in the news lately, and I don't I'm just talking like sports, but I think about the Tennessee Vols in football, and they've kind of had some individuals who were more focused on themselves and what they could get. And now, not only did that lose the trust of the entire team and organization and fan base, ouch,
right?
But now he really doesn't have the shots that he was going for as a result of his, shall we say, selfishness. So there's a negative example. I hate to throw anybody under the bus, but, servant leadership is crucial to the health of any structure or organization.
Right. Yeah. Hey, I won't fault you for talking about the Tennessee Vols in a negative way. As long as you're not talking negative about my wife's University of Alabama.
What people can't appreciate right now is that you're wearing this A hat. Right?
This is actually Atlanta Braves.
Okay.
Though, so.
See, I can't always differentiate between the Braves A and the Crimson Tide.
Right. Yeah. Atlanta Braves. So I'm from Indiana. So
Okay, that's fine.
But I liked what you mentioned though, Robert, with thinking about servant leadership not being a taker. I think that's a good way of looking at it. Maybe a way that a lot of people can understand. It's not thinking what can I get out of this, but how can I get input from other people. You mentioned strengthening relationships. I can think of numerous examples of different things we've had at Henderson Church where I've met people and I've developed relationships with them as a result of working together with them.
Serving, yep.
Yeah, you're down in the trenches with them. I mean, I think of people like Tony Torres, who is one of the newer members of our congregation, has a talent of cooking, and he's worked in the food industry for a long time. Didn't know Tony super well, but working with him through different things, through Community Car Care Day, men's breakfast, and you get to know them, and it's kind of something that happens, and not even that you're trying to necessarily build a relationship, but by having this servant leadership mindset, you develop relationships as well.
And Tony's a great example. So here's even if you guys don't know Tony and you're listening to this, but Tony and his wife, Miss Tammy, I mean, they are people who they say we've been blessed and we've got resources. Most of that is like kitchen type resources.
Supplies,
they got a lot of cooking supplies, but they say we want to use them, and they do. And you know what's amazing about that? They are serving, and to your point, they're kind of behind the scenes. Yeah. The person who's preparing the food. The food is going to take the show, right? So the preparers aren't really going to take the show unless something bad happens, which it doesn't when the tourists are involved.
It's always good.
But if you notice, they have a way of creating a buzz of workers around them. Yeah. And I would argue that's servant leadership.
Yeah. They get others involved and get them excited about it as well.
Yeah, and they have fun in the process.
Yeah. It's always fun with Tony for sure. Yeah. Thinking about some biblical examples, we talked about organizations, talked about churches. Obviously, you mentioned one of those, washing the disciples' feet. John 13, 12 through 15 is probably the example. If you were to say servant leadership, washing someone's feet, that's the lowliest position you can have there. Is probably one of them. Another one that comes to my mind is when Jesus talks about we're called to be shepherds. So the idea of shepherd is kind of that position of servant leadership as well. Yeah. What other biblical examples come to your mind?
Well, so the Bible repeatedly emphasizes serving others. I mean, so much so that Jesus says you can summarize all the Bible in two main things, right? Love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. That's serving others right there. Matthew 22, 37 to 39. I think about some of the big leaders. I can't mention them all, but any good leader in the Bible is going to have some aspect of servant leadership if you think about it. Moses was in the trenches with the children of Israel all the way through, leading them through really difficult times. Of course, at first, he didn't really want to do that.
Yeah.
But God sort of said, no, you gotta, and that's what it looked like. I mean, Moses is in the foothills of Sinai, just like the rest of them are. Nehemiah worked to rebuild Jerusalem's walls, and he was there alongside the others. I mean, Nehemiah 4 describes how he's there, like, working and building, and they didn't change their clothes for days, and they had a sword in one hand and a hammer in the other, and Nehemiah uses the personal plural pronouns over and over. We were doing this. We were doing this. So Nehemiah's there. Paul says he poured himself out in service to the churches, Philippians 2:17, like a drink offering. Yeah. And he said, I'll gladly spend and be spent for the Lord, 2 Corinthians 12:15, which is one of my favorite phrases. Spend and be spent. Wow. But the greatest example is Jesus. I mean, you're not going to find anybody better than Jesus. And so much of this is because here's the guy who has all authority. Everybody ought to be bowing down to him. But he kneels and washes the disciples' feet, which is just, the reason why we talk about that so much in this context is because it's the perfect example of what Jesus was all about. Everybody was shocked that he would, but nobody was shocked that he wanted to. You know what I mean? Like, right. Peter's like, you're not washing my feet. And Jesus is like, if I don't, then you're not mine. And he's like, well, in that case, give me a whole bath. Don't stop at the feet. Go from head to toe. Yeah. In Mark chapter 10, James and John, and some of the accounts in the other Gospels say that it was like their mom. We're not surprised a mom would want the best for her sons. But anyway, right. The sons of thunder, the sons of Zebedee, they come up to Jesus and they say, will you do what we ask you? And he's like, what do you want me to do? And they said, give us the best places in your kingdom. One on the right, one on the left. So these are like the places of honor. And Jesus just looks at him and he's like, you don't really know how ignorant you just sounded. Really, he says, you don't know what you're asking, because if you want to be the greatest in the kingdom, it means it's going to cost you the most. Yeah. And he says, are you willing to drink the cup that I drink? Are you willing to be baptized with the baptism with which I'm baptized? He's not talking about being baptized in water. He's not talking about salvation. He means you're going to be overwhelmed with difficulty. Yeah. That's what this is going to look like. And, all the rest of the apostles begin to shame James and John because they dared ask that, although I guess secretly they all probably want it. And then Jesus looks at them, and that's when he uses this as an opportunity to teach them. And he says, you know that those who are considered rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them. Their great ones exercise authority over them. This is, by the way, the model of leadership that we're used to. Yeah. Somebody's at the top barking down orders, do what I say or else, right? Jesus says, that's what the Gentiles do, but it shall not be so among you. Whoever would be great among you must be your servant. Whoever would be first among you must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and give his life a ransom for many. Okay, I want the ransom price, because the ransom is the price that Jesus paid to secure my redemption, which means I'm free from sin. I want that. But he says, if you're going to accept the price, then you've got to accept what comes along with it. And that means you're going to be a servant. I look down through what I just read. This is Mark 10, 42 to 45. I look down through here and I see the words, give his life, serve, slave, servant. Okay, these are terms which in a typical culture don't sound fun. Right. But Jesus says, no, this is where the greatest blessings are. Yeah. And I think that people who have been, like the Torreses, for example, they're great examples. I'm glad you brought them up, because it's like every time you see them, they're smiling. Yeah. Well, why have they found this secret to life? And by the way, Mr. Tony, he's got a pretty amazing past. He's a baseball player. He was a pro baseball player. It's amazing stuff. And he has found something that is like a secret, that it really shouldn't be a secret, but it is, because so few are willing to tap into it. Contentment that comes from a joy and a peace that just looks like serving Jesus, which means I'm going to serve other people. Yeah. You mentioned some biblical examples of things that we shouldn't do, like what a servant leadership does not look like. And so it kind of shows, though, that this is not something that's ever been easy. Yeah, our culture tells us you need to, like you said, lord it over them. That's how leadership is expected to be in organizations, different things like that. That's how a lot of leaders, that's how they lead. Yeah. So it's not something that's the norm a lot of times. So this isn't something that's nothing new under the sun. Right. This is something that probably people have struggled with since Bible times as well. But do you think servant leadership maybe is something that is more relevant now more than ever? I know this is something that's been a challenge, but our culture today even more so, maybe? Yeah, I do think that. Now, to your point, servant leadership has always been important. And even when the leadership style of our culture was dramatically different than it is right now, servant leadership is what we needed. People talk about how leadership styles have shifted over the years, and maybe this is more of a West thing or, United States thing. It used to be that in the business world, the CEO could bark down the orders and blah, blah, blah. Now it's more important that people feel like they know him and it's a part of a community. And even if you don't know, maybe if this is a social media thing, I don't know, but you want to feel like you know the guy at the top. So what I'm saying is, even when that wasn't the MO, it still should have been, a servant leadership mind. But having acknowledged all of that, I mean, Matt, because you work with college students all the time, younger generations especially, but really all of us, if we're honest, are looking to see that the person at the top is really living what he or she claims and is trying to move us toward. We want to know that person is legit. So we prioritize self-promotion and personal success, but servant leadership is a refreshing counter to all of that. Mm-hmm. That's the reason why you don't want to, I'm sorry if I offend somebody. Nobody wants to be tricked into being to listening to a pyramid scheme sales pitch.
Yeah.
Because you feel like you're just using me, and a lot of times, the products aren't as great as they're selling, but it's like, you're just using me. Yeah. Nobody wants to feel used. Nobody wants to feel like they're a pawn. People want to feel valued, and servant leadership is a refreshing counter to this idea of just using people. It emphasizes humility, it emphasizes community, and people are hungry for that. We talk a lot about authenticity these days as well. We should. People want authentic leaders who care about them as people, not just a means to an end, but a community, a place to belong. Servant leadership builds lasting loyalty, deeper connections, and these are qualities that our society really needs right now. I don't know much about Dave Ramsey as a person, okay? Yeah. And whether you agree or disagree with his financial logic or advice, that's really neither here nor there. I know this. A lot of the people that I know or have known who have worked for Ramsey Solutions are pretty pleased there because he invests in them, not just through his paycheck, but they'll rent out a theme park and, whatever. I mean, they'll do things just to celebrate their culture, and then he'll address them as almost like peers. And I mean, there's no question who's in charge. I mean, his name is on the front of the building. Yeah. But at the same time, I think what I'm seeing in that is him attempting some servant leadership, and I respect that.
Yeah. What are some challenges that maybe people face when trying to be better servant leaders? We think about athletics. We talk a little bit about this on the podcast. Sometimes athletes feel, well, if I come across as a servant leader, it makes me look weak. Yep. It doesn't make me look like I know what I'm doing. I'm not in charge. Yeah. I'm not really the team captain that I need to be, whatever it is. So there's a little bit of a balance that you have to have between having the service, but also having that authority that you need to have the respect of your teammates, maybe people that you work with, maybe people at church. You need to have that authority, but you also need to balance that with service. So maybe from your standpoint, what are some challenges associated with servant leadership?
Well, isn't it amazing? Because somebody's got to call the shots, right? I mean, leadership is a necessity. This is not something that is just, this is kind of the way we do it. We've got to have leaders, which means somebody needs to be casting vision and setting values and leading us in those things, helping us to achieve buy-in with all that stuff. I mean, somebody's got to call the shots. And in the church, that can be really difficult because you're supposed to do that without lording your authority over. And I say in the church, any Christian is going to be interested in leading in this way. So it means that you have that authority. You know that you can wield that authority, but it's going to temper the way you do it. Yeah. To your point, I mean, weakness, inefficiencies, lacking authority, lacking decisiveness, oftentimes those are things that come across as kickbacks in a servant leader kind of life. And in a performance-driven environment, the patience that's required to have servant leadership may be frustrating to a lot of people. It just takes time to roll up your sleeves and to do things. I mean, it would be easier to sit at the top and call all the shots. It takes more time to show up at an event and roll up your sleeves and do stuff with people. Yeah. It's easier to sit in a room and plan, or in my case, it'd be easier to sit in a room and write sermons all day, but I can't do that. Nobody wants to listen to me if they don't know that I really do care about them. Yeah. And they shouldn't if I don't. So it takes time to bring people along, to give them the space to iterate and to buy in and to grow and to change. None of us really like change, at least personal change. We like the idea of it maybe, but even some people are averse to that. And servant leadership requires long-term thinking, which can sometimes clash with short-term profit goals. Yeah. You can't just think, in athletics, you can't just think I want to win this game, right? Sometimes the team that you're working with today isn't ready to win this game. You're thinking about what you're going to do in the off season or whatever it is. And that can be kind of difficult. So another challenge is, as a result, servant leaders may experience burnout if they neglect their own needs, if they lack support, if they're not willing to build a team of like-minded people around them. And that takes investment. Sometimes we feel like we don't have time to do that kind of stuff. It's just easier to just do it myself.
Yeah.
And it is, but not in the long term. But all that said, the long-term benefits really outweigh the short-term challenges. Servant leaderships tend to produce more resilient and loyal teams.
Yeah.
The problem can be sometimes that higher-ups or even the leaders themselves aren't willing to give it the time that's necessary to really see the good results. In the ministry world, the number that used to be quoted was it takes about 7 years for a minister to really get boots on the ground, to really be able to hit his stride. Yeah. He knows the people and he knows them well, not just their names, but their stories. And now he's able to lead them in a good way, in a godly way. Mm-hmm. But, the Jenkins Institute, those guys do kind of, informal surveys and stuff. They say the average tenure of a preacher is 5 years.
Yeah. You don't even get to the 7 years.
You don't even get to the 7 years. So somebody's shooting themselves in the foot, whether it's the preacher because he messed up something in the meantime, or maybe it's the elders or, the group of people at the church that just aren't willing to give it the time that it takes to do something. And I think we see that, bear with me. I'm an Auburn fan.
Oh, no.
And we are still, how many coaches are we paying off right now in football? Football alone, we're doing, Bruce Pearl's been around for a while in the basketball world, but Hugh Freeze is still kind of new and we're not really sure, what all's going on with him. All that to say, sometimes we're not willing to give a guy the amount of time that's needed to do what he needs to do to establish the kind of culture that's going to yield long-term benefits. So those are definitely some challenges there.
Yeah. Do servant leaders open themselves up to maybe being taken advantage of in certain situations? Maybe especially in churches, you think about we want to help others, and that can maybe you want to do your part to help others, but you can't always control how others are responding to that. And there might be some that do take advantage of that. And maybe what are some ways that, so you mentioned structure is needed. There has to be some sort of, the leader has to lead in some ways that's different than maybe what a servant leader would. Mm-hmm. So there has to be some structure there. Maybe what are some practical ways that people can be servant leaders while still not getting taken advantage of? Maybe the best way to word that.
Well, there's no question that when you take the posture of a servant, you're adopting a vulnerable posture. When Jesus stooped down to wash their feet, that was a vulnerable posture, and that's part of what felt so foreign about it to the disciples. That's why Peter kicks back at it. And, if you're leading a group of people, maybe larger than, 12 or 20 or something like that, you're going to face the challenge that you can't do the same things for everybody all the time. I can't spend equal time with every member at the Henderson Church of Christ every week. Yeah. I mean, it's just impossible. Yeah. And so what that means is you do for some what you wish you could do for everybody. Yeah. And as an opportunity arises, you try and take it. And that's going to require a very delicate balance of personal structure. I want to use my time wisely. The Bible talks about redeeming the time. Yeah. I want to do that. And that means that I try and do things like batching similar tasks and time blocking and all these productivity hacks. Yeah. I nerd out about stuff like that. But sometimes something arises that's going to interrupt my time blocking. And I've got to have the wisdom enough to know, no, I need to do that. That's more important than what I had planned today.
Prioritizing.
Yeah, so the priority is there. You're going to be misunderstood sometimes, and as the leader, every leader is going to have to make calls that others will not understand, and you can't always explain. Sometimes you can. I think that's why having a backlog of that trust. In marriage relationships, we talk about a trust bank or a love bank. Willard Harley talks about a love bank. And you got to invest more than what you take out, what you debit. Yep. And as long as you keep, the income higher than the outflow, then you're okay. Yeah. Well, that's kind of true when we talk about leading groups of people. I've got to build trust and maintain trust and realize that trust is something that is earned, and it is a response to perceived circumstances. So if I'm leading in a way that is a little countercultural, it's a little uphill, it goes a little against the grain, my people will or will not follow me based on whether they believe they can trust me. Yeah. And so I think that's kind of what that structure sort of looks like. In the church, especially elderships may have to make some calls, and they may not be able, because of confidentiality and other things, to share, like, this is why we said this or that. And some people, because they're people, we're all people, and we're going to make our own perceptions about that, and we draft our own narratives, and then we start talking to others about those narratives, and then next thing you know, you get this giant story that isn't anything like truth. But leaders just have to be willing to accept that. So knowing that you have that authority means that the buck stops with you, so you're responsible, and it means sometimes you're going to have to exercise that authority. But you're going to, when you do have to do that, when you do have to take a little bit away from your trust bank, you're going to do that very sparingly and realize that I need to follow this up with investing back in. And all of that, you got to guard yourself that you don't get caught up with pride and you do it in a manipulative way. You can't do this in a manipulative way, because people will sniff that out too. So again, you got to start with yourself. Who are you? Who are you when nobody's looking? What values do you have, and do you hold yourself personally accountable to? That's what's going to come out in what you do from that point forward.
Yeah. Really good thoughts. I mean, this is a lot more than I could, even what I've studied with servant leadership. You brought out a lot of points that I hadn't even thought about as far as the way this is lived out in churches. So I really appreciate that. Anything else that we didn't get to, maybe that you kind of wanted to touch on with servant leadership that we didn't have a chance to get to?
Well, I just say that servant leadership isn't just a style of leadership. It's really a way of life. It starts with really small daily actions of service, and then it grows into a mindset that shapes how we lead, how we relate to other people, even how we view our own purpose. And so ultimately, for us as Christians, it's about becoming more like Christ, who calls us all to love and to serve. And so whether you're on a sports field or in an office or at home, all this stuff works in the family too. Each of us can influence the world around us by choosing to serve other people first, and all of our relationships will be better for it.
Yeah. Robert, I really appreciate you coming on today. I know you're a busy guy. Appreciate you coming on. And be sure to check out the resources that Robert's a part of, lightnetwork.tv, and obviously the conference that we talked about October 3rd through 5th at the Henderson Church of Christ. Be sure to register for that. You can find information on that on Facebook as well as other online platforms as well. So yeah, Robert, really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, thanks for joining us for this episode of the Playing with a Purpose podcast. Special thanks again to Robert Hatfield for being my guest this week. Be sure to listen to this episode and future episodes on Spotify or anywhere you listen to podcasts. You can also catch the Playing with a Purpose podcast on the Freed-Hardeman Athletics Champions of Character website at gofhulions.com/champions of character, and on the NAIA Champions of Character website at naia.org/champions of character. Join me for our next episode as I talk with Freed-Hardeman Sports Information Director, Mr. Dustin Seymour, on the topic of stories behind the stats. And remember, winning isn't just about the scoreboard, it's about the character we build along the way. We'll see you next time on the Playing with a Purpose podcast.